the antidote to political and religious tyranny, or the reality of your world. I make these videos to change the way you think, because almost everything you have been taught was designed to stop you thinking critically and accept everything you are told as truth without question. Slave citizens. Are you a citizen or a slave to the state? The chances are that you hold a passport declaring that you are a Class P citizen. Because in 1961, most nations signed up to the UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness. Why? Because a stateless individual is not a slave to the system. Oh, and a Class P means peasant class. Those of us that know we are sovereign and therefore know the system works against us declare our desire to be stateless and not a peasant citizen. But our state does not always respect our wishes as mere peasants. They may claim that we are not of sound mind or just an outright conspiracy theorist, like myself, as I allegedly spread malicious rumours that our government has no authority over us. The financial system controls the news and not the other way around, and the landmass we call Earth is in its entirety either petrified or decomposed biology or by design, all of which is allegedly disproven by government-educated indoctrinates and printed theories, aka lies, that are force-fed to us as the absolute truth without any evidence to substantiate anything they tell you or directly contravening the blatantly obvious evidence. Google says slaves to the system means being completely controlled or overly influenced by a powerful, often impersonal structure such as a corporation, government, or society. It describes a state of feeling powerless and forced to conform to the system's demands, often at the expense of personal freedom or well-being, as one works hard for its benefit. Losing personal agency. It implies a lack of control where an individual feels they have no choice but to follow the rules, work a demanding job, and live a life dictated by the system. Influence of the system. The term can apply to various systems, from the corporate system and its demands on artists to the studio system and its control over actors. Society pressure. It can also refer to a broader sense of societal expectations where people feel forced to pursue money and material wealth to achieve comfort, leading to a cycle of work and consumption that lacks personal fulfillment. Blind conformity. Another perspective is being a slave to the system of beliefs, where one blindly follows an ideology or the directions of others without critically examining the intent behind them. So you are a slave to your government. You have been sold into bondage and traded. You are the collateral that backs government bonds and fiat currency. Your future is tokenized, becoming debt security and monetized and traded. So you are essentially the security of the government's debt. Even their own figures of £2.9 trillion is calculated at over 90% of GDP, gross domestic product, which means that even if everyone in the UK paid 90% tax on every penny of their income, the government still couldn't pay off the debt that you owe to the Bank of England, as it's all borrowed in your name. The actual debt is higher as all money is fiat currency, so we have to class this as debt owed to the Bank of England, as they hold the licence to print money in the UK. The total currency in circulation, cash and digital, is allegedly 3.7 trillion, which is then 126% of GDP, approximately, plus interest and charges. It is technically impossible to repay the debt to the Bank of England, as you would need to borrow more money to pay the interest. In the meantime, your government is spending and borrowing more money like crazy to run up more debts in your name. Google says sold into bondage means to be transferred into a state of involuntary servitude or slavery, where a person becomes the property, chattel, or is under the control of another person or entity and is forced to work without adequate compensation or freedom. The phrase implies a transaction that results in a loss of personal liberty and autonomy. This concept can be understood in several contexts. In a literal and historical context, being sold into bondage means a person is treated as a possession, chattel, that can be bought, sold, and forced to work for the owner. This includes various forms of modern slavery still practiced today. Chattel slavery: a person is the legal property of another. Debt bondage: a person is forced to work to repay a loan, but the debt is often inflated with excessive interest or undefined terms, making it impossible to repay, and the debt can even be passed down to children. This is the most widespread form of modern slavery. Human trafficking, forced labour. Individuals are moved by force, fraud, or coercion and exploited for labour or services in various industries. Domestic servitude. Victims are forced to work in private households with little or no pay, and their freedom is restricted. Figuratively meaning. The phrase is also used figuratively to describe a state of being completely subjected to a powerful, controlling force or influence, such as an addiction or emotion, or a negative pattern. For example, bondage to sin, a common biblical and spiritual metaphor where a person's actions, thoughts, and desires are dominated by a sinful nature or force, making them unable to break free without external divine intervention. Bondage to hunger, pain, or lust, being overwhelmingly controlled by strong physical or emotional desires. In all contexts, the core meaning involves a loss of personal liberty, autonomy, and control over one's own life. In a previous video, I said we are all committing a criminal offence under the Terrorism Act 2000 of funding the parliamentary terrorists that terrorise us daily simply by paying our taxes. Google says the phrase "no taxation without representation" is famously associated with the American Revolution, but has roots in British history, originating with John Hampden's refusal to pay ship money in the 17th century. In the UK, the principle remains relevant to debate about democratic representation for all citizens who are taxed, particularly concerning groups like non-voting residents or migrants who contribute to the tax system but have no say in how that money is spent. Historical roots in the UK. The principle was first articulated in England during the English Civil War, when parliamentarian John Hampden refused to pay the ship money tax, arguing that the king should not impose taxes without Parliament's consent. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," is a direct legacy of this, but it is more strongly remembered as a key grievance of the American colonists against British rule. The British government's counter-argument was the concept of virtual representation, stating that colonists were represented in Parliament in the same way as non-voting citizens in Britain itself. Modern relevance in the UK. Today, the principle is invoked in discussions about democratic disparities within the UK. For example, a petition on the UK Parliament website argued that UK residents who are unable to vote in general elections should be exempt from income tax, as they have no say in government spending. Groups who are affected include long-term residents who are not citizens and thus cannot vote, and who contribute to the tax base through income and indirect taxes like VAT. This raises the question of whether it is democratic for a government to tax people who have no representation in its democratic process. It has recently been announced that Graham Moore's election petition has been dismissed by the court judges. You know, those Whigs that, along with the government, council and police, think they have the right to ignore and silence us. Graham had requested a full independent recount. If no fraud had taken place, then a recount would have confirmed the results. But they simply could not take the risk of an independent recount of the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, as this could potentially demonstrate that election fraud has taken place, and they could not risk the truth tainting their painted reality of a free and fair election. Personally, I do not feel that I am represented by any member of Parliament, none of them. As a constituent of Runcorn and Helsby, I do not feel that the court acted appropriately or fairly, and certainly hasn't upheld constitutional rights and laws. Sarah Poaching has never responded to any of my requests, nor has Halton Council, and nor did Sarah Poaching's predecessor, who demonstrated that he felt all of his constituents were beneath him, and certainly of the peasant class. So even as a voting citizen, I do not feel that I have any representation within the UK Parliament. It is clear to myself that we'd no longer live, if we ever did, in a democratic state. If you agree with my views and thoughts, please like and share this video with your friends and like-minded people. I make these videos to change the way you think, because almost everything you have been taught was designed to stop you thinking critically and accept everything you are told as truth without question.